What if a single political decision, made thousands of miles away, could cripple one of America's most important drone manufacturers overnight? Not through bombs, not through cyber attacks, but through supply chains. In late 2024, the United States approved nearly $2 billion in arms sales to Taiwan, including advanced missile systems and radar equipment. On top of that, Washington also committed another $560 million in military support. Some of those weapons didn't just sit on paper, they were shipped. Then Beijing responded. China announced sanctions against 3 United States defense companies. Media. Chinese government press conference announcing sanctions. Exterior of Skydio. Huntington Ingalls Industries. Edge Autonomy Headquarters. News graphics highlighting sanctioned companies. Skydio, Huntington Ingalls Industries, and Edge Autonomy. Their assets in China were frozen. Chinese companies were banned from doing business with them. At first glance, this might look like political theater. Strong words, symbolic punishment, diplomatic chest-thumping. But it wasn't symbolic. It hit something real. Let's zoom in on Skydio. Skydio isn't just any drone startup. It's one of America's leading drone manufacturers. Its drones are used by United States law enforcement, the military, and even supplied to Ukraine. More than 1,000 of its drones have reportedly been sent to support Ukrainian operations. Now here's the problem. Skydio depends on lithium battery components sourced from China. And when Beijing imposed sanctions, it didn't just make a statement. It cut off access. Imagine building high-performance electric cars, and suddenly, you can't buy batteries anymore. It doesn't matter how good your software is. It doesn't matter how advanced your design is. Without batteries, nothing flies. This isn't abstract geopolitics. This is production lines potentially slowing down. Contracts at risk. Military orders delayed. If Skydio runs out of battery inventory before it finds a replacement supplier, production could halt. And that means something bigger. United States military supply lines could be affected. Ukrainian battlefield support could be disrupted. A rising American tech champion could be forced into crisis mode. This reveals something uncomfortable. The world's most powerful military still depends on its strategic rival for critical components. And that raises a much bigger question. How did we get here? To understand that, we need to zoom out, beyond Taiwan, beyond sanctions, to the global battlefield that's been reshaping defense economics since 2022. To understand why this moment matters, we have to step back to 2022, when the war between Russia and Ukraine erupted into a full-scale conflict. Almost immediately, the United States stepped in as Ukraine's largest military backer. Tens of billions of dollars in weapons, ammunition, vehicles, missile systems, and intelligence support began flowing in. On the surface, this was about geopolitics, defending sovereignty, countering Russia, supporting allies. But beneath that layer, something else was happening. The defense industry was booming. United States foreign military sales surged sharply in 2022 and 2023. Defense contractors reported record revenues. Factories ramped up production. New contracts were signed. Old stockpiles were replaced with newer, more advanced systems. Here's how it works in simple terms. War creates demand. Demand fuels production. Production generates revenue. Revenue strengthens the defense industrial base. It's like a massive engine. Once it starts running, every gear begins turning faster. When the United States sends older weapons to Ukraine, it often replaces them with new equipment from American manufacturers. That means new contracts. That means jobs. That means profits. This isn't a conspiracy. It's economics. The United States has long had what President Eisenhower once called the military-industrial complex. In times of conflict, that complex expands. Companies innovate faster. Governments spend more. Supply chains stretch across continents. So when we talk about support for Ukraine, we're not just talking about battlefield strategy. We're also talking about industrial growth. War isn't just strategy, it's also business. And this is where things start to connect. Because while the United States, the defense sector was expanding rapidly, and, well, tensions with China were also rising. Washington accused Beijing of indirectly helping Russia. Sanctions were placed on Chinese firms, and trade restrictions increased. But Beijing didn't immediately hit back in the same way. Why? That's where the story gets more interesting. As the war in Ukraine dragged on, tensions between Washington and Beijing quietly intensified. U.S. and Western officials accused China of supporting Russia through trade, dual-use goods, and economic cooperation. The claim suggested that Chinese companies were helping sustain Russia's war machine. But publicly, no clear direct evidence of large-scale Chinese military aid to Russia was presented. Still, the pressure increased. Washington placed sanctions on multiple Chinese firms. Export controls tightened, technology restrictions expanded, and companies accused of collusion with Russia found themselves cut off from parts of the U.S. financial system. From Beijing's perspective, this looked like containment. Now here's what's interesting. China did not immediately retaliate in the same dramatic way. There was no sudden wave of sanctions against major U.S. defense giants at that moment. Instead, Beijing largely responded through diplomatic statements, trade adjustments, and selective restrictions. It was strategic patience. Think of it like a chess match. One side makes aggressive moves early. The other side studies the board, waits, and looks for the moment when a countermove will have maximum impact. So the question becomes, why wait? Why not respond immediately when Chinese firms were being sanctioned? What changed? The answer lies in Taiwan. Because for Beijing, Ukraine is important. Trade disputes are important. Technology restrictions are important. But Taiwan is different. Taiwan isn't just another geopolitical issue in China's view. It's a sovereignty issue, a red line, a core national interest. And when Washington's arms sales to Taiwan escalated and weapons began arriving, Beijing decided the time for patience was over. To understand why China responded so forcefully, we have to understand one thing clearly. For Beijing, Taiwan is not just a foreign policy issue. The United States has long maintained unofficial relations with Taiwan and regularly approves arms sales under its domestic law framework. But in 2024, the scale and frequency of those approvals stood out. The U.S. approved its 16th arms sale package to Taiwan under the current administration. That included $560 million in military support, nearly $2 billion in advanced missile and radar systems, and actual shipments already on the way. From Washington's perspective, this is about deterrence, strengthening Taiwan's defense capabilities. From Beijing's perspective, it's direct interference in what it considers an internal matter. That difference in perspective is critical. For years, China has responded to U.S. arms sales with statements, protests, and symbolic measures. But when deliveries began moving from paperwork to physical shipments, Beijing shifted from warning to action. That's when China formally sanctioned 3 U.S. defense-related companies: Skydio, Huntington Ingalls Industries, and Edge Autonomy. Their assets in China were frozen. Chinese individuals and businesses were prohibited from cooperating with them. This is where the story changes. Before, it was diplomatic tension. Now it became economic warfare. Because when you freeze assets and cut companies off from suppliers, you're not just sending a message, you're targeting their operations. And among those 3 companies, one stood out. Not because of its size, but because of its vulnerability. Skydio. Among the sanctioned companies, Skydio is the one that immediately felt the pressure. Skydio isn't a traditional defense giant building aircraft carriers or submarines. It builds high-tech drones, small, agile, packed with AI-driven navigation systems. These drones are used by United States police departments, emergency responders, and the military. More importantly, more than 1,000 of them have reportedly been supplied to Ukraine for reconnaissance missions. Skydio even claimed that its latest X-10 model passed Ukrainian electronic warfare testing, meaning it could resist signal jamming in one of the most technologically intense battlefields in the world. Ukraine reportedly requested thousands more. On paper, Skydio looked like a rising star. But here's the twist. Its key battery supplier is based in China, and China controls over 80% of global lithium battery production and shipments. That's not a small share, that's dominance. When Beijing's sanctions prohibited Chinese firms from doing business with Skydio, it effectively pulled the plug on a critical component. No batteries means no drones. Imagine owning a bakery that suddenly can't buy flour. You may have the best recipe in town. You may have customers lined up outside. But without flour, nothing gets baked. That's the situation Skydio faces. If existing battery inventory runs out, production slows, orders get delayed, contracts with the United States military could be affected, and shipments to Ukraine could stall. And finding a new supplier isn't as simple as ordering from a different website. Battery manufacturing is complex. It requires specialized materials, precise engineering, and strict quality control, especially for military-grade drones that must perform in extreme temperatures and high-risk combat environments. Even if alternative suppliers are found, they may take months to ramp up production, charge higher prices, and deliver products that haven't been tested under battlefield conditions. Costs could rise sharply, delivery timelines could slip, reliability could be uncertain. This is where geopolitics becomes real, not speeches, not headlines, but factories waiting for parts. Skydio's crisis reveals something bigger than one company's struggle. It shows how deeply intertwined global supply chains are, even between strategic rivals. And that leads to a deeper contradiction in United States policy. Because while Washington talks about reducing dependence on China, reality tells a different story. For the past few years, United States officials have used a new phrase, de-risking. The idea is simple: reduce dependence on China for critical technologies and supply chains. Not full economic separation, but lowering vulnerability in key sectors like semiconductors, rare earth minerals, and batteries. On paper, that sounds logical. No country wants to rely on a strategic rival for essential components used in military equipment. But here's the problem. Reality moves slower than policy. China dominates large parts of the global lithium battery supply chain, from raw material processing to cell manufacturing. Building alternative production lines in the United States or allied countries isn't like flipping a switch. It takes years, billions of dollars, specialized engineers, environmental approvals, and stable access to raw materials. Even then, performance matters. A battery for a toy drone is one thing. A battery for a reconnaissance drone operating in freezing temperatures, electronic warfare conditions, and combat zones is something else entirely. Reliability isn't optional. So here's the contradiction. The world's largest military power still depends on its strategic competitor for critical components. That's not weakness, it's interdependence. Modern globalization created deeply connected supply chains. Companies optimized for efficiency and cost. China became the manufacturing hub for many advanced components, including batteries. Now, as geopolitical tensions rise, those same supply chains have become pressure points. It's like building a house with shared plumbing between two neighbors. Everything works smoothly until one neighbor turns off the water. The Skydio case exposes this vulnerability clearly, and it raises a broader question. If sanctions can disrupt American defense suppliers, can the reverse also be true? Because the United States has also used sanctions as a weapon, especially in the drone industry. And that brings us to the mirror image of this story. Now let's flip the situation. While China is sanctioning American defense companies like Skydio, the United States has actually been sanctioning China's biggest drone manufacturer for years, DJI. DJI isn't just a Chinese company, it really dominates the global drone market. It holds more than 70% of global market share, In the United States consumer market, estimates have put its share around 80 to 85%. That's not just leadership, that's near control. And it's not just hobbyists using DJI drones. U.S. law enforcement agencies rely heavily on them. Emergency rescue teams use them in search and rescue missions. Farmers use them for precision agriculture, spraying crops, monitoring plant health, and increasing efficiency. For many of these users, DJI drones are simply cheaper, more reliable, and honestly, more advanced than the alternatives. The U.S. government began restricting DJI as early as 2016. Federal agencies were barred from purchasing its products. Later, additional sanctions and restrictions were introduced. Lawmakers even pushed measures like the Countering China's DJI Drone Act, aiming to further limit its operations in the United States market. The goal was clear: reduce reliance on Chinese drone technology. But here's the catch. Despite years of sanctions and political pressure, DJI drones are still widely used across America. Why? Because replacing a dominant supplier isn't easy. If a police department has trained its officers on DJI systems, switching brands means retraining staff, replacing software, and paying more. If farmers rely on DJI's precision systems, alternatives may cost more and perform worse. Sanctions can restrict growth. They can limit government purchases. They can send political signals. But they don't automatically eliminate dependence. In fact, sometimes they actually reveal it. And this is where both stories, Skydio and DJI, really connect. The United States depends on Chinese battery components. American agencies depend on Chinese drones. China, meanwhile, depends on global markets and technology flows as well. Sanctions are no longer just punishments. They are leveraged tools in a world where supply chains are deeply interconnected, which leads to the biggest question of all. Are we entering a new era, where supply chains themselves become weapons? Step back and look at the full picture for a moment. This story is not just about Taiwan. It's not just about Ukraine. And it's not just about drones. It's about how global power works in 2025. In the past, power was measured in tanks, ships, and fighter jets. Today, power is also measured in battery factories, semiconductor plants, rare earth processing facilities, and control over supply chains. When China sanctioned Skydio, it didn't fire a missile. It restricted components. When the United States sanctioned DJI, it didn't seize factories. It restricted market access. This is economic warfare, quieter, slower, but incredibly powerful. Supply chains have become leverage. If you dominate a critical material, you hold influence. If you control manufacturing capacity, you gain bargaining power. If your rival depends on your components, you have a pressure point. The battlefield is no longer only on land or at sea. It runs through factories, through shipping lanes, through lithium mines and chip fabrication plants. Now, the big questions. Will the United States accelerate domestic battery production and rebuild key manufacturing at home? Will China continue using its industrial dominance as a strategic tool? Or will both sides realize that deep interdependence makes total decoupling almost impossible? Because here's the reality. Modern economies are like massive webs. Pull one thread, and vibrations travel across the entire system. The Skydio situation is not an isolated event. It's a preview of how future conflicts may unfold, not just with weapons, but with supply restrictions, export controls, and technological choke points. We are entering an era where economic decisions can have battlefield consequences. And that changes everything. If you found this analysis helpful, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss our upcoming deep dives into US-China tech rivalry and the future of global supply chains. And I want to hear from you. Do sanctions strengthen long-term power, or do they expose hidden weaknesses? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.